Welcome
Hello.
everybody. Welcome
Hello.
everybody to Belfast Recover Group's tradition meeting. Christopher is very enthusiastic to get into tradition now. Over to you, Christopher, to get us started. Thank you for your service.
Hello, everyone. I'm sorry, it's not Brian, it's me again. Thank you to Emma, to Amy, and to Mags, and thank you for leading us in, Mags. Um, we've got another week of traditions workshop, and uh, we're into the ninth tradition. Um, it's about structure, it's about boards and committees, and so on and so forth. Now's your opportunity to run away. That you've got the opportunity now. We're talking about the structure of AA, okay? This isn't like, the ultra glamour stuff, but conversely, it is both prudent, informative, and essential that you understand how this thing operates, as it were. Because there's a rub to all of this, in my candid facetiousness of describing this as a little dry, is that it's anarchy. Bill wanted anarchy. Bill wanted an anarchical operation. When I think of anarchy, I think of maybe the Sex Pistols or revolution or all these other bits and pieces. But the book describes revolution when it comes to recovery. So, in a way, because Bill had a sense of humour, he's also describing the anarchy of how we would arrange and operate an organisation which you will see is different to what you would expect in a capitalist structure, such as a company, a big company, where you have all the power directed to the top of the pyramid, the CEO, the board, directors, middle management, and then people at the bottom. And then we run it a slightly different way. And I'm mindful of the fact that we're an island when it comes to discussing the structure and so forth of being part of Alcoholics Anonymous. Is that here in this group is that we discuss the structure of Alcoholics Anonymous in Ireland. So I've got one slide to show you, and I can show you that. And that will hopefully head off any questions about structure in Ireland. But I'll be super honest at the end in it, because if I don't know, I don't know. And I might privately message Max and go, can you help? So, but without further ado, I'm going to follow a really similar structure to last week, in as much as I've maintained and used specific sources of information, primary information, that take us from how the traditions came about, and in this case, obviously, tradition 9, and then also just think about some real life examples. I've got the illustrated traditions, which I really encourage you to go away and have a look at. It's still available. You Google it, it's online. It's called P43, and is a really, really useful tool in explaining the traditions. Too often, folks work through the book, get to page 164, go start and sponsor, and then don't discover the concepts and the traditions and all the other bits and pieces. And as we discussed last week, there's a circle and there's a triangle. Of our structure, of our unity, of our function, on how we make sure that this, the main thing, the main event, the first 164, is available at the right time for when someone is at their greatest need. Because ostensibly, Alcoholics Anonymous is when the still suffering alcoholic says, help. And at that precise moment, someone says, I know how you feel. I can help you with that, mate. So 9 is going to be, so I'll read through the two traditions to start off with, two versions of the traditions. We do a short form and a long form. So just to put it into context and to remember, they were discussed for a period of time. So remember that the big book was published in 1939, and then the 12 traditions were announced at a conference held in Cleveland, the 15th anniversary of AA. And It presented the opportunity for long-lasting and focused unity of Alcoholics Anonymous, what it describes as one of the greatest assets that our society has in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. And this is in no small part as part of the organisation that exists. And I get it. Talking about organisation isn't about, anonymity on the level of press, radio, film, and so forth. It's not talking about our common welfare should come first or some of the other sexier bits within it, but the organisation is utterly essential in how we proceed and form and work ahead. In the book Alcoholics Anonymous, Tradition 9 is referred to as, in the short form, Alcoholics Anonymous, as such, ought never be organised, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those that they serve. And in the long form, it states that it's written out in quite a long form. Each Alcoholics Anonymous group needs the least possible organisation. Rotating leadership is the best. The small group may elect its secretary, the large group its rotating committee, and the groups of a large metropolitan area their central or intergroup committee, which often employs a full-time secretary. The trustees of the General Service Board are, in effect, our Alcoholics Anonymous General Service Committee. They are the custodians of AA tradition and the receivers of our voluntary AA contributions by which we maintain our AA General Service Office at New York. They are authorised by the groups to handle our overall public relations, and they guarantee the integrity of our principal newspaper, the AA Grapevine. And we've talked about Grapevine last week, and that is where Bill published all 12 of the traditions originally prior to the announcement of the conference in Cleveland. All such representatives are to be guided in the spirit of service, for true service leaders in AA are but trusted and experienced servants of the whole. They derive no real authority from their titles. They do not govern. Universal respect is the key to their usefulness. So, let's unpack that a little bit. And as ever, I'm going to go to our dear old friend, Bill Wilson. So he wrote in August 1948 in the Grapevine, aforementioned AA-approved literature, and he talked about what he saw as least possible organisation. He talked about this universal idea, he describes it as no fees or dues, so free at the point of entry, free all the way through. And if you remember last week, we discussed what should and should not be acceptable in terms of spending. No rules imposed on anybody. One alcoholic, bring a recovery to the next. That's the substance of what we most desire, isn't it? And so he sketched two archetypes, two types of people that will be in our fellowship, okay? So there's one which is the conservative, and then there's one which is called the promoter, the salesperson. I think I'm probably going to be in the secondary element of being more of a salesman when it comes to AA. We have, for example, this is his description of the conservative, the kind of AA who is for simplicity. Terrified of anything organised, he tells us that AA is getting too complicated. He thinks money only makes trouble, committees only make dissension, elections only make politics, paid workers only make professionals, and clubs only coddle slippers. Says he, let's get back to coffee and cakes by cosy firesides. If any alcoholics stray away, let's look after them. But that's enough. Simplicity is our answer. Doesn't want to do anything more. You might find someone who's very similar to that. So they worry about money, paid workers, committees, publicity, all it just wants to keep it narrow, safe, secure, don't want to make any big changes and so forth, all right? And then you've got on the other side the promoter, eager for hospitals, paid organisers, rapid expansion, dream big, sometimes too big, If I had my way with Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd be shouting about it from the rafters. I'd be advertising it, sticking it everywhere, Twitter accounts, how can we help? My opinion doesn't mean nothing. My opinion is wrong. According to what is described here, this isn't what we should be aiming for. I was in a library in Salisbury because I was looking for a loo, reached a certain age. There's not many public toilets in Salisbury, but that's a very separate matter. And noticed the notice board, and of course on the way out, It's a little blue poster, just sat there in the corner. Have you got a problem with alcohol? Can we help? Just there. Just did all that it needed to do, which was, do you have a problem with alcohol? And I thought to myself, oh, I don't anymore. I did this thing, and exactly what it said on there, but it said, dude, just give us a call. Really simple. So Bill's view of this is that we should value both the conservative and the enthusiast, that there is a thin line between the two where we should operate, understand, and function. So the conservative stops us from losing our soul, as it were. And then the promoter reminds us of our duty to be feverish, to keep going, still approach, still search for the still suffering alcoholic. And so tradition 9 is the plot which goes through the middle of these two. It is the route which is resist general organisation, but create special services essential for 12-step work to make sure that this thing bloody works. It is the diagram of what the engine looks like to keep this going. All right? Of how we keep this thing running and operating and so forth. So the other bit is that Bill was really mindful. You know, this is quite a difficult one to discuss when you think about what does that organisation look like if we are part of this anarchy that it describes. He goes into a little detail a little further on. He talks about how if an AA group elects a secretary or rotating committee, if an area forms an intergroup committee, if we set up a foundation, a general office, or a grapevine, then we are organised for service. The AA book and pamphlets are meeting places and clubs, or dinners and regional assemblies. These are services too. Nor can we secure good hospital connections, properly sponsor new prospects and obtain good public relations just by chance. People have to be appointed to look after these things, sometimes paid people, which we described in detail last week in tradition 8, as to what that looked like. Special services are performed, but by none of these special services has our spiritual or social activity, the great current of AA, ever been really organised or professionalised. Yet our recovery programme has been enormously aided, while important these service activities are very small by contrast with our main effort, which is what? Helping the still suffering alcoholic. So this is that balance it talks about. There's lots of wonderful descriptions within the text of Alcoholics Anonymous where it describes balance and so forth. And one can think about when reading through the amends process and thinking through step 9 and thinking about how it approaches that amends process with balance and thoughtfulness and dignity. It's fascinating and interesting how this balance is approached within tradition 9. So the next one to look at is around the 9th tradition within the illustrated 9th tradition. So within the pictures, it's got images of folks working in the mailroom and someone else making the coffee. So everyone's little opportunity in the way to organise. You think in really basic terms here, we've got people who have roles to make this group function. I sent a text on WhatsApp to say the meeting was started. A group conscience previously had organised when this meeting will occur. The group conscience had organised what the content of this meeting was. We've got Mags as our lovely host. We've got Amy as our co-host. We've got Emma who's reading for us as well. All our lovely, wonderful people helping, all giving their time freely. But that organisation is limited. It's just that thin thread amongst the two. So shortly before his death in 1950, Dr. Bob, the other guy who helped found Alcoholics Anonymous, left Bill Wilson with a final resonant phrase. And he said, let's keep it simple. And these words became a guiding principle for AA, a reminder that the heart of recovery lies not in complexity, but in clarity and connection. And so he later reflected on this, Bill Wilson, cautioning that while simplicity is vital, It must be understood in two distinct forms. We need to distinguish sharply between spiritual simplicity and functional simplicity. So the simple message of there is a solution, one solution, the text and spiritual program expressed within Alcoholics Anonymous, and the functional simplicity to keep the organization simple. Organizational structure of Alcoholics Anonymous, simple. So the spiritual simplicity is the raw human moment when somebody says help and somebody else replies, I know how you feel, I'm here to help you. And if you think and reflect on that, that relationship couldn't be organized. It's just together. This exchange, which is deeply personal, healing, defies formal structure. It's the soul of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is unencumbered by red tape and bureaucracy. But you've got the balance that Bill talks about, which is without some degree of organization, chaos would reign. Bill says we must, to some extent, organize to carry the message or face chaos. And chaos is not simplicity. The challenge lies in preserving the spiritual essence while enabling practical function. Imagine, for instance, trying to computerize sponsorship. AI? Imagine it might be coming along the line, somebody be typing into AI, I'm really struggling with alcohol, what should I do? It's a really horrifying thought. Say it was matching sponsors and sponsees together in the same way that you would use a dating profile. It's just remarkable plurality as to what it could look like. And the absurdity of such a system just underscores the danger of over-organizing what it means to be human, what it means to be organic and human and thoughtful and empathetic, and all the things which a computer will never be able to master. So in the realm of group action, some structure is essential. Someone needs to make the coffee. Otherwise, the meeting will end up caffeine free. No donuts. Who pays for the Zoom account? Who sorts out the money and the donations which are made as part of Tradition 7? Who looks after that? Who reports on that? So members step up not to wield authority, but to take responsibility. From coffee makers to AA service roles, and they're grounded in accountability. It's not about control. It's not about seeing it as some kind of badge of honor to be worn and so forth. Yes, it is a noble tradition that we are part of, but this isn't something where we're trying to boost people's egos. So as Tradition 2 and as Tradition 9 interlock, they affirm that leadership in AA is always answerable to the group. Unlike corporate boards that dictate policy, AA's trustees serve in a custodial role. So rather than directing narrative, policy, all the rest of it, it's just a custodial role. They vote at the conference as individuals, not as a ruling body, and the General Service Office doesn't issue commands. It simply shares collective experience. It's a clearinghouse. It's not a headquarters. You don't have a head office of Alcoholics Anonymous in the sense that you would say of a Marks and Spencer or somewhere like that, where you would have a traditional head office issuing policy, so on and so forth, if that makes sense. And yet with this, it is minimal structure. AA works miraculously so. And why? Why is that? Because every committee, board and group remains anchored to Tradition 5, the one primary purpose of carrying the message to the alcoholic who still suffers. This unwavering focus preserved the spiritual simplicity at the core of the fellowship that was described just earlier in the text, and to stray from it to entangle AA in issues beyond its mission would risk dangerous complications. Indeed, in Alcoholics Anonymous Comes of Age, it's really good. Look, it's very good, very good. Comes in a nice shiny cover. It's very cheap. AA text, really worth reading. Talks about the steps and traditions. Talks about balls ups, mistakes, errors. Can be quite funny, but more than that, it's very human. It also expands on the detail within the book Alcoholics Anonymous that you know and love. Talks a bit more about Jack Alexander and John D. Rockefeller, Silkworth, Miss Dr. Silkworth, and obviously it just adds a little colour to the people that you know, understand, and for those of you that sponsor, read about and write about and speak about so often. So I'm just going to read a bit out of how it came about. So Bill writes, he said, he starts off with the tradition, just to read it again. AA, as such, ought never be organised, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those that they serve. And he's very honest about it. He said this one still puzzles a lot of people. How can you have a society that is unorganised and at the same time organise services? Yet Alcoholics Anonymous does that. When Tradition 9 was first written, it said Alcoholics Anonymous needs the least possible organisation. And this is really interesting. He says in the years since then, we have changed our minds about that. Today, we're able to say with assurance that Alcoholics Anonymous, AA as a whole, should never be organised at all. Then in seeming contradiction, we proceed to create special boards and committees, which in themselves are organised. How can we have an unorganised movement which can and does create a service organisation for itself? Scanning this puzzler, people say, what do they mean, no organisation? What we really mean, of course, is that AA can never have an organised direction or government, policy setting and so forth. Because do you know what? They wrote the policy. I wrote it in here. That's it. Do the book. That's why it's really crazy when you hear people taking their own version of going, oh, yes, well, I take my sponsees through the 12 steps and 12 traditions. You what? Why do you think they haven't changed the text of Alcoholics Anonymous all those years? Because they put lightning in a bottle. To amplify this, did anyone ever hear of a church, a nation, a political party, even a benevolent association that had no membership rules? Did anyone ever hear of a society that could not somehow discipline its members and enforce obedience to necessary rules and regulations? Does not nearly every society on earth give authority to some of its members to impose obedience upon the rest and to punish or expel offenders? Isn't that fascinating when we think about AA? Therefore, every nation, in fact, every form of society has to be a government administered by human beings. Power to direct and govern is the essence of organisation everywhere. And so, here's the rub to this rule. Alcoholics Anonymous is absolutely the exception. It doesn't follow that at all. Not at all. It does not at any point conform to the pattern of a government, neither its General Service Conference, its General Service Board, nor the humblest group committee can issue a single directive to an AA member and make it stick, let alone hand out any punishment. We've tried it lots of times, but failure is always the result. That's what I said about making mistakes and how it describes it in this text. It's really wonderful. Groups have tried to expel members, but the banished have come back to sit in the meeting place saying, this is life for us. You can't keep us out. Committees have instructed many in AA to stop working on a chronic backslider, only to be told, how I do my 12-step work is my business. Who are you to judge? And AA may take advice or suggestions from more experienced members, but he surely will not take orders. Who is less popular than the old-time AA, full of wisdom, who moves to another area and tries to tell the group there how to run its business? He and all like him, who view with alarm for the good of AA, meet with stubborn resistance or worse still, laughter. In fact, AA is so unorganised that someone once suggested we put up a sign in each AA club saying, anything goes here, folks, except you mustn't smoke opium in the elevators. Good advice for life for everybody there. So it continues within the text. He puts that we had to form a structure that could serve but never rule. I think that would be my message to you, is that it would serve but never rule. That's the rhythm and the organisation of an anarchical organisation that it describes. The conference was born not to command, but to listen and respond. He tells how GSO staff learned to reply to queries with, "Of course, you are at perfect liberty to handle this matter any way you please." That humility is the safeguard. Service bodies suggest, never dictate. The conference was deliberately designed with rotating delegates, a wide base of representation, and no power to govern groups. So just go through a little bit of history with you guys and just talk about some of the early AA, just for a bit of context. So if you think about, before the text was published, which came out in 1939, was that in the mid-30s, these groups in their infancy, there wasn't a blueprint. There wasn't how do we do this thing? You can search on Google. You can look at the table where Bill and Bob had that cup of coffee. You can see the table where Ebby had a coffee with Bill, or rather Bill was trying to push him a grapefruit and gin, I think it was. And he went, "No, I'm all right." You can see it all, these limited moments of organisation. Meetings were in living rooms and church basements. No service boards, no literature, no helplines. The only organisation was one alcoholic phoning another. And that informality kept us free from any form of bureaucracy influence. It also meant that when disputes arose, there was no way of sorting it out. Disputes occurred, things happened. And so Tradition 9 grew from this thought about coordinating without controlling. So there were things that needed to be organised if we move into the 40s. So the book came out in 1939, and for those that are familiar with their foreword to the second edition, it talks about this mushrooming process. Why? Because it bloody worked. It bloody worked. And the map behind me, we started off on the east coast over here, and it just went across. And it talks in the text about all these different places that it went to. And it ballooned so quickly, it even took part in Alaska and Hawaii, which hadn't even become part of the United States of America at that stage. It ballooned, it worked. UK, so on and so forth. And so what needed organisation? Well, they needed to send the book out, literature. The book needed printing and it needed distribution, public information. So if you think about Jack Alexander, Fulton Ursula, folks were taking an interest, journalists were taking an interest. This thing blew up. So journalists asked questions, alcoholics asked questions. So who was it that was going to answer? And then news group support was required because people who were isolated, people who wanted that help, were writing for help. The night that I took my last drink of alcohol, I didn't know that was my last drink, as it were. But the only thing I had in my head was, I think I need to ring AA, because my knowledge of that was based on a program called The West Wing, because I watched people go to Alcoholics Anonymous and that, and I thought that's what you do, because I didn't know what to do. So I rang up, I spoke to somebody local to me in Bournemouth, rang up the number, and they gave me details of an online meeting I could go to. And that organisation was essential to my recovery. There's a bit of organisation trivia in terms of my recovery, and if you'll indulge me, I have never been to a physical meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. My entire experience has been online. Never been to a physical meeting. Do you know why? Because the simplicity of spirituality is on the basis of using the text of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I share with you the great hope that this group always does that. Always shares the simple spirituality. Put my teeth in. Of just do the damn text. Text works. And I recovered from being hopeless. Absolutely hopeless. So these initial needs, talking about the literature, the public information, the new group support and so forth, that led to the creation of what was the Alcoholic Foundation, which then became the General Service Board and the General Service Office. But Bill was really, really clear. These were service bodies, okay? They were not governing bodies. They weren't issuing policy. They were to make it easier for members to carry the message, not to tell them how to do it. And so thinking about service structure, we've got groups, which are autonomous, self-supporting, minimal roles, rotated. We have a chairperson, which is rotated out every 2 years here. Treasurer gets rotated out. Public information role we have. Person that looks after the meetings. That role will be rotated out into groups, and they link the groups. They run helplines, coordinate public information work, regions, bringing together intergroups, and they send reps to conference. And then you've got the General Service Board, who are the custodians of the traditions, literature, national services, and so forth. But more importantly, let's show you how this works. Just make this a bit bigger. Within Ireland, and so we talked already about governance and organisation. But organisation and governance are exclusive. They live apart from each other. This is about being a servant, being a trusted servant. This is about organisation. The simplest term of, I'm going to go and help this other guy because they are still suffering as an alcoholic, all right? And then we provide structure, narrative, and anarchical structure and organisation, and all of that for that to occur. So I'll just show you. I'll share my screen. It's going to be really good if you're listening back, by the way, and I'm sharing the screen here. I'll just try and be as descriptive as I can. Just make sure I share the right screen. There we go. Am I sharing the right screen? It's good. I'll just share a very brief anecdote, unrelated. When I worked for another company, I went to a really serious meeting in London, lots of really official people there. And the lady was starting to put her presentation up, and she inadvertently put up how she was splitting all of the items in her home in her divorce, which was a lovely moment. There was 2 columns there, and the only person who spoke up said, "Well, I'm pleased that someone's getting the ninja." I won't tell you who that was, because everyone really thought that this lady was really frightening. It was just fucking hilarious. Good lad for getting the ninja. Anyway, back to the structure. So, here we are in Ireland. We talked about this. We talked about our leaders, but trusted servants, they do not govern. And we've got the structure here. I'm just trying to be really descriptive to you that is listening back in the future. So future listener, I'll try and make this really understandable. You've got the AA groups, and then you've got 2 GSRs from each group, and they form the area committee. And then 4 members from each area committee go into intergroups, and then the intergroups will go up to the General Service Conference. So you've got 16 delegates, trustees, intergroup secretaries, 2 World Service delegates, and the company secretary there. And so we just talked about there, so the groups there at the top, autonomous, self-supporting, minimal roles, rotated. And we got the intergroups here, so they link the groups, run the helplines, coordinate PI work, and so forth. And then you've got all the way up to the General Service Board, or rather here, General Service Conference, so custodians of the traditions, literature, national services, etc. So there's just a slight difference in language when it comes between GB and Ireland. I'm just going to stop the share there. So, close that there. Come over here. So, just going to give you, sorry, the last point is, which is really, really important. When you think about the structure of any company, and you think about, you've got the executive board and the CEOs and so forth, all that power right at the top of the pyramid. There we go. Let's go that way round, and then it's more of a pyramid. And the power is concentrated at the top, and then that information, that governance, that policy all heads down. For us, we're totally the different way. We're like that. So it comes from the groups and emanates outwards. And at the top, it's about governance in terms of they don't govern. It's the least possible organisation. It's purely about being a custodian, being a servant. So, just a few case studies, few things. We think about if you had a helpline, that would be. So we talked about the 12-step call, which I made all those years ago. April 14th. Can I just show you what an impact it made on me? Other than the fact that I'm much, much better looking than I was then. Is that it's the point where it's fallen out. Where are we? I'm hoping I've still got it. It might have fallen out of my book. I've still got the post-it note with the details of the meeting in New Jersey. And I was going to say I still keep it in my book, but I think it's probably on the floor somewhere. I gave it in my book usually. And just to say that humble call, that little bit of organisation, which would have been organised by, say, an intergroup committee. But that intergroup committee has no influence or authority over the groups. It's only there because the groups choose to support it. And then you could have someone in another group say who was treasurer and they didn't want to leave. Well, they were reluctant to rotate. They wanted to maintain the prestige, the power, the responsibility, all those things that if you let run to the head of an alcoholic could make them really sick. They were reminded of the principle that, a newcomer took over, learned with support, and the outgoing treasurer found a new role, and the group's health was preserved. And so for folks, just to really encourage you, you think that it's a really terrifying thing to go take up a service position. I and my ugly mug could do it. It's like you can learn, and there's lots of people who are really, really helpful. Jump everyone was really, really helpful when you came in on your sorry backside going, I can't stop drinking. Same principle applies. Give this out really freely, really happy to help. It's like we really need people to keep this thing going. The traditions are just the lifeblood of this thing. Whilst, we talk and I joke about this fact that there's the least possible organisation, it couldn't happen with people who maintain and move forward from just doing the 12 steps to move into the 12 traditions, to be advocates, custodians of a simple set of useful guidelines, I suppose would be the best way of describing the traditions. And I'm mindful and thoughtful about how Bill would describe it. We talked last week about Tradition 8, about those paid service positions, because those roles are about having the right horse for the course. The phrase horses for courses. It's about having the right person, the right expertise of doing these jobs. It isn't about paying for prestige or power. It's about paying for a service. It says in the concept 11 about having the best possible persons for that role, and they should be paid correctly. It's about, well, think back about we moved over to online meetings. You hear erroneously people describe them as Zoom meetings. Many platforms available. It's merely a way of describing how we hold our meetings. And, at the time that was a minefield, and off folks went to go look at their traditions about how they were going to deal with this pandemic, how it would work, and so forth. If you think about at the end of the foreword to the fourth edition, written in 2001. I'm always amused by this, by the way. This is really nerdy, but I think about how fast my internet was in 2001. It wasn't very fast. Think about trying to download a Matrix Reloaded trailer. It was just really slow. I'm really nerdy, I'm sorry. While our literature has preserved the integrity of the AA message, sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship. Taking advantage of technological advances, put my teeth in. For example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country or around the world. Fundamentally, though, the difference between an electronic meeting and the home group around the corner is only one of format. In any meeting, anywhere, AA share strength, experience, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and help other alcoholics. Fucking glorious. Modem to modem or face to face, AA speak the language of the heart in all its power and simplicity. Talking about that simplicity of spirituality we talked about as well. Bill warned about a power trap, subtle ways in which service can become about control rather than help. True leadership, he wrote, is exercised by example and by persuasion, never by command. When we think about an informed group conscience, why we send out information, this group will send out information a week before because it does it for four reasons. It does it to share all the relevant information, allowing proper time for reflection, listening to minority opinions, and seeking substantial unanimity, giving the opportunity for people to think about it properly beforehand. And then there's all these different types of, small services that are available. We've got an AA helpline, there's a website, we've got public information. You get folks who work in hospitals, prison liaisons. The other bit is that anonymity isn't just about protecting identity when we think about Chris B, changing your name, all those other bits and pieces. It's also about putting principles before personalities. You hear that, okay, principles before personalities. But in this example, you rotate the people out of the roles because then you don't get folks who become the face of a fellowship. You don't get one person, this figurehead, as it were. We're really careful of these sorts of things. Not good for them either. And if you delve deeper into AA Comes of Age, the history is dotted with examples of people who've drifted from these principles, drifted from them and learned from it. The early years groups tried to, have rules that were enforced, expelling members for not being sober enough or for disagreeing with the meeting format. And these attempts always backfired because you get something called resentment, which is always the friend and ally of any recovering alcoholic. And then unity's frayed. And, the group either changed course or withered, arguments occurred. And so, when you think about these online meetings and so forth, the application and transference from a physical meeting was just about thinking and reflecting on these simple principles again, rotating the people who look after, say, PI, making sure that there's simple guidelines to follow when it comes to this. We have a script which we follow and we don't deviate from, and that's agreed at a group conscience. We protect anonymity. We explain that we don't ask that people put their whole name in. We don't ask that people have their cameras on. Nothing along those lines. No stringent rules. I always put my full name on here. I've got a tattoo on my forearm. And if anyone asks what it is, I'll tell them what it is. Mainly because they think it's the PlayStation button. But I do it because I'm what Bill described as the promoter and the gobshite. Don't worry me. Because people go, oh, you don't look very alcoholic. Yeah. Did. I'm one of those recovered shiny bastards. So I'll come to tying this up. Sorry, it's 20 past. So what's going on, Max? Okay. I'll do a few more lines. Thank you all for listening, darlings. So, Bill Wilson summed it up in Comes of Age with a line that's worth carrying and taking away of the one thing that you will remember from it. We are a society of equals. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. That's not just a slogan. It's a lived reality that helps keep AA healthy. Thank you for listening to me. You all did very well. Thank you lots.
Thank you so much, Christopher.